The vastness of space stretched endlessly, a black canvas dotted with distant stars, each one a world with its own story. Among those countless lights, there were places that the galaxy seemed to have forgotten. Remote outposts and colonies, once established with hope and determination, now drifted in isolation, their connection to Earth and the wider universe all but severed. Communication lines had become faint or completely silent, supplies were running low, and the people who remained were learning to survive with nothing but their own resourcefulness. It was a lonely existence, marked by quiet desperation and a fading sense of hope. On one such outpost, perched near a dying star that cast a dim, reddish glow over the barren surface, the residents went about their days quietly, each moment a careful balance between survival and despair. The buildings were simple, designed to withstand the harsh conditions of their environment, and the people had adapted, finding ways to recycle and reuse every possible resource. Water and food were rationed meticulously, with every drop and every crumb accounted for. Despite this, a sense of isolation hung over them like a shadow. They knew that the galaxy had moved on, leaving them behind, and though they tried to carry on, the absence of contact from Earth or any central authority was a constant reminder of their vulnerability. The outpost's communications room was a small, dimly lit area filled with blinking consoles and tangled wires. A few residents sat at the terminals, scanning for any sign of contact. They listened for hours on end, hoping for even the faintest signal from the stars. Many of the older inhabitants had memories of messages that used to come regularly, messages filled with encouragement, resources, and updates from Earth. But those days were long gone. Now, all they heard were static-filled channels and occasional bursts of interference. Each failed attempt left them more frustrated and more anxious, but still, they tried again, because hope, no matter how fragile, was better than surrender. Meanwhile, far from the forgotten colonies, on Earth itself, life was moving in ways that were both ordinary and extraordinary. Cities bustled with people, each absorbed in their own lives, yet in the shadows of government buildings and high-security complexes, a different kind of vigilance was underway. Intelligence agencies, military research divisions, and specialized task forces monitored the vast reaches of space for anything unusual. Most signals were routine or meaningless, but among the noise, a small team had detected something different. These signals were not random. They were deliberate, though faint and fragmented, carrying the weight of desperation and hope. The team recognized them immediately as calls for help. Many of their colleagues dismissed them as interference or the result of natural cosmic phenomena, but this unit knew better. They had seen patterns before, understood the subtle nuances of a signal sent over impossible distances. To them, these were not just anomalies. These were lives reaching out, silently begging for someone to remember them, for someone to come. Among this elite team were individuals trained to respond where others could not. They were not just soldiers or scientists, they were problem solvers, people who thrived in chaos and who could make decisions that ordinary humans could not. They had spent years preparing for situations exactly like this, where waiting for orders could mean the difference between life and death. Their training was rigorous, their minds sharp, and their resolve unbreakable. They understood that the universe was vast and often indifferent, but humanity's duty was not to wait for the stars to care, it was to act, even when the odds were impossible. In the quiet of their operations room, the team analyzed the signals with intense focus. Each pulse, each variation, told a story. They could hear the fear, the uncertainty, and the endurance woven into the transmissions. Some signals came from outposts that had been abandoned in reports, others from colonies that no official records had acknowledged for decades. What struck them most was not just the technical need for assistance, but the human element, the resilience of people who had survived in extreme conditions, adapting and finding ways to endure when the rest of the galaxy seemed to have turned away. The story of the forgotten colonies was not one of despair alone. There was courage in every decision made to survive. Children had grown up learning skills necessary for living in isolation, adults had become experts in repair and resource management, and communities had formed bonds that were stronger than any official structure. These people were forgotten by governments, ignored by bureaucracies, and left to face harsh realities, yet they had persisted. Earth's elite team understood that the stakes were not just about providing resources, they were about reconnecting these people to the world they had been told had abandoned them, showing them that someone still remembered, and that someone still cared. Back at the outpost near the dying star, a young engineer named Lyra worked tirelessly to maintain the life support systems. The equipment was old, failing more frequently with each passing day, but she refused to give in to exhaustion. Each repair she made was an act of defiance against the quiet despair that threatened to take over. Lyra often paused to listen to the faint transmissions on the communication lines, feeling a strange mix of frustration and hope. She had learned that even the smallest signal could carry a monumental promise and assurance that the universe still had room for her people. As the hours turned into days, the isolation of the outpost weighed heavily on its residents. There were moments when the silence seemed deafening, when the stars outside their windows appeared indifferent, and when the enormity of their distance from Earth felt unbearable. Yet, in those same moments, the thought that someone might be listening, that someone might answer their call, kept them moving forward. It was a fragile hope, one that could be extinguished easily, yet it burned quietly within them, refusing to die. Meanwhile, on Earth, the team convened to discuss the next steps. They faced a choice that no ordinary decision-making process could address. Waiting for authorization could result in failure or worse. Acting without approval carried risks, both political and personal. Yet the message was clear: people were in danger, and time was slipping away. In that room, surrounded by advanced technology and data streams, the team's leader made a decisive statement: they would respond. Without hesitation, without delay, and without warning. Their mission was simple in purpose, if complex in execution: to reach the forgotten, to restore hope, and to show that humanity does not abandon its own. Preparations began immediately. Advanced spacecraft were readied, optimized for speed, stealth, and survival in environments no ordinary vessel could withstand. Supplies were carefully chosen, tailored for long-term sustainability in colonies that had already endured so much. Teams were briefed not only on the technical challenges they would face but on the emotional landscape they were entering. Every individual understood that this mission was as much about humanity as it was about logistics, as much about connection as it was about survival. As the spacecraft sat ready in the hangars, engines humming softly in anticipation, there was a sense of quiet determination among the team. They were not seeking recognition, nor were they motivated by glory. Their purpose was singular: to descend upon the forgotten and remind them that Earth remembered, that humanity still cared, and that the warriors of hope were willing to traverse the void to prove it. For the residents of the outpost near the dying star, life continued in its quiet rhythm, unaware that the universe's indifference was about to be challenged. Children played among the structures, laughing with the simplicity that only isolation could teach, while adults maintained the delicate balance of survival. Each day brought new challenges, from mechanical failures to environmental hazards, yet they faced each one with resilience born of necessity. They did not know that the signals they had sent, faint and nearly lost to the vastness of space, had been heard. They did not know that the warriors of Earth were already moving, preparing to descend into their world and change the course of their lives forever. And so, in the silence of space, two stories were moving toward each other, one of quiet desperation and steadfast endurance, the other of vigilance, courage, and unwavering resolve. The galaxy may have forgotten them, but Earth had not. The stage was set for a convergence that would bring hope where there was none, connection where there was isolation, and a reminder that humanity's reach, no matter how distant, could still touch the lives of those who had been left behind. The signals continued to pulse faintly, a thread of communication stretching across the void, carrying the story of forgotten worlds and resilient hearts. Somewhere far away, Earth's warriors listened, preparing for the moment when they would cross the stars without warning, bringing aid, reassurance, and the promise that the galaxy's neglect would not define humanity's future. Every calculation, every repair, every quiet moment of reflection was a step toward that encounter, a moment that would redefine what it meant to be remembered, and what it meant to fight for hope in a universe that had almost let it slip away. And in that quiet preparation, in the stillness before action, one truth became clear: the galaxy may forget, but Earth and its warriors would not. Time on Earth moved at its usual pace, fast, relentless, and filled with the ordinary rhythms of life, but within the quiet walls of government and military facilities, a different kind of urgency pulsed. The signals from the forgotten colonies had not stopped, and Earth's elite team knew that waiting was no longer an option. Every passing hour meant the difference between survival and collapse for those distant people. The voices of the forgotten, faint and fragile across the vast reaches of space, were a call that demanded a response. Inside a high-security operations room, officials debated the implications. On one side were the politicians, concerned about international repercussions, the costs of sending aid, and the possible consequences of involving Earth directly in a situation that had long been neglected. On the other side were the warriors, specialists trained to act when hesitation could mean disaster. They did not argue over politics or consequences, they focused on the people who were counting on them. Their decision was simple: help had to reach those colonies, no matter what. The council meeting stretched for hours, with voices clashing over strategy, legality, and risk. Yet the warriors, calm and confident, presented the facts clearly. They spoke of desperate communities clinging to life, of failing systems that could no longer sustain them, and of the human cost of inaction. They showed images of the colonies, aged and barren under distant suns, and described the skills, resilience, and courage of the people living there. Each story carried weight, painting a vivid picture of lives on the edge, quietly struggling without recognition. Finally, a decision was made, not by debate, not by hesitation, but by moral clarity. Earth would act. The warriors would descend into the forgotten worlds without delay, without waiting for approval from anyone else, and without warning. There was no time for hesitation, no room for bureaucracy. The mission's purpose was singular: to reach the colonies, restore hope, and prove that humanity does not abandon its own. Preparations began immediately. The spacecraft that would carry the team were readied, checked repeatedly for every possible contingency. They were designed for stealth, speed, and endurance, capable of crossing vast distances that ordinary vessels could not. Supplies were meticulously chosen: medical kits, food, water, repair equipment, and tools for communication, everything necessary to stabilize colonies that had been abandoned for decades. The warriors trained, ran simulations, and rehearsed every possible scenario, ensuring they would be prepared for anything the forgotten worlds might throw at them. At the same time, intelligence teams analyzed the environments the warriors would encounter. They studied planetary atmospheres, weather patterns, radiation levels, and potential hazards. They mapped every outpost, every station, every area that had been reported long ago, creating a detailed blueprint for the mission. The challenge was not just reaching these places, but adapting to conditions that no one had faced in years. Every decision had to balance speed, safety, and efficiency. Every choice could mean life or death for the people waiting on the distant planets. Meanwhile, in the colonies themselves, life continued under the harsh conditions of isolation. Lyra, the young engineer from the outpost near the dying star, was exhausted yet determined. Each day brought new mechanical challenges: life support systems breaking down, energy supplies running low, and minor malfunctions threatening to cascade into bigger problems. She worked tirelessly, repairing, adjusting, and maintaining the fragile systems that kept her community alive. Every repair was done with care and precision, every calculation made with the awareness that a small mistake could have serious consequences. The people of the colonies were used to adversity, but the constant pressure wore on them. They had adapted to survive alone, learning skills that were rare even on Earth, yet the strain of isolation and dwindling resources was undeniable. Families relied on each other more than ever, forming tight bonds of support and trust. Children learned to help with basic tasks, contributing to their community in ways that were essential for survival. Every individual carried responsibility for the group, and every act of cooperation became a lifeline. Back on Earth, the warriors understood that entering this environment required more than technology and logistics, it required understanding the human element. They prepared psychologically, discussing the possible reactions they would encounter: fear, suspicion, and skepticism from people who had been abandoned for so long. They trained to communicate clearly, to build trust quickly, and to act with both authority and compassion. They knew that restoring hope would take more than delivering supplies, it would take showing that someone cared, that someone had remembered them when the rest of the galaxy had moved on. As the days of preparation passed, the sense of anticipation grew. Every spacecraft was ready, every supply meticulously packed, and every member of the team mentally and physically prepared. There was a quiet energy in the operations rooms, a focus that left no room for distraction. Outside, the world continued in its ordinary routines, unaware of the extraordinary mission about to unfold. But within those walls, every calculation, every plan, and every decision carried the weight of countless lives waiting in silence, in darkness, and in isolation. The warriors knew that timing was crucial. They could not announce their arrival, for warning could create panic, disrupt fragile systems, or allow unforeseen dangers to escalate. The element of surprise was essential not for advantage over enemies, but for the safety and stability of the colonies. They needed to arrive decisively, establish control, and offer help before chaos could take hold. Precision, speed, and empathy had to work together in perfect harmony. As the team prepared to depart, messages were sent to Central Command not for permission, but for information updates and final coordination. Every transmission was coded and secure, ensuring that the operation remained a secret until the moment it was executed. It was an unprecedented mission in many ways, not because it was impossible, but because it required absolute trust in human judgment, courage, and dedication. The warriors were acutely aware of the risks, yet every one of them felt a quiet resolve. The mission was right, and doing what was right outweighed fear, politics, or personal safety. Meanwhile, on the outposts, life went on in a rhythm shaped by necessity. The colonies had learned to survive without expectation of aid, yet a small spark of hope had been rekindled by the faint signals they continued to send. People worked together, repaired equipment, and planned for contingencies, but deep down, they wondered if anyone would ever answer their call. Nights were long and filled with quiet reflection. Parents told stories to children, recounting the history of humanity and the bravery of those who had explored and settled the stars. Every story, every memory, carried with it the weight of hope, reminding them that the universe might be vast, but they were not truly alone. The moment of departure came quietly. The spacecraft lifted off, engines glowing softly against the darkness of the launch chamber. The team aboard was silent but focused, minds occupied with the mission, the conditions they would face, and the people awaiting them. There was no fanfare, no celebration, only the steady hum of preparation and the weight of responsibility that filled the cabin. Each member of the team understood the gravity of their task, and each was ready to do whatever was necessary to succeed. As the spacecraft entered the void, leaving Earth behind, the team looked out at the stars. The distance ahead was immense, the unknown vast, yet the purpose of their mission illuminated every challenge. They were not explorers seeking glory, they were bearers of hope, moving swiftly and silently toward lives that had been neglected for too long. Every mile traveled was a step toward connection, toward reassurance, and toward the restoration of faith in humanity's commitment to its own. For the colonies, life continued without awareness of the approaching help. Yet in the quiet, in the steady hum of their equipment and the shared efforts of the people, a sense of anticipation lingered, unspoken but deeply felt. Somewhere far away, someone had heard them, and the universe was about to shift in ways they could not yet imagine. The stage was set for reunion, for hope, and for the reminder that no one is truly forgotten when humanity remembers. And so, as the spacecraft moved through the darkness, Earth's warriors prepared to descend, carrying with them not only supplies and technology but courage, empathy, and the unyielding belief that every life mattered. Decisions had been made, risks accepted, and preparations completed. The galaxy might have forgotten these worlds, but Earth would not. The warriors were moving, silently, swiftly, and with determination, toward a future where the forgotten would be remembered, and hope would be restored. In that moment, the universe seemed both vast and intimate, filled with challenges yet brimming with possibility. The forgotten colonies remained unaware, yet their lives were about to be touched in ways they had never imagined. The stage was set for a mission that was more than a rescue. It was a statement, a promise that humanity's responsibility to each other extended beyond distance, time, or neglect. The warriors were ready, and nothing would stop them from fulfilling that promise. The signal of hope continued to pulse faintly across space, bridging the distance between the forgotten and the remembered. And somewhere, far from Earth, the first stirrings of change were about to ripple through isolated worlds. The journey through the vastness of space was long and silent, the spacecraft gliding steadily toward the forgotten colonies. Inside, the warriors maintained focus, running through simulations, reviewing maps, and preparing for every eventuality. The tension was quiet but tangible. They were moving into unknown territory, where every decision would carry weight, and where the margin for error was slim. Yet despite the challenges, there was an undeniable sense of purpose. Each member of the team knew why they were here: to reconnect, to aid, and to remind people that they were not forgotten. As the spacecraft approached the first colony, the planet below came into view, a barren landscape with muted colors under a distant sun. The structures of the outpost were weathered but standing, a testament to the determination of those who had lived there for years. From above, the colony looked fragile, a small pocket of human existence struggling against the vast indifference of space. But the warriors saw potential where others might have seen abandonment. They saw people who had endured hardships beyond imagination, whose resilience had allowed them to survive, and whose hope could be reignited. The landing was precise and careful. The warriors had to ensure that their arrival did not disrupt the delicate balance of the colony's systems or unsettle its residents. As the spacecraft touched down, small dust clouds rose from the surface, and the silence of the outpost was momentarily broken by the hum of engines. Inside the colony, Lyra was among the first to notice the unusual movement on her sensors. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be real? Could someone actually have come in response to the signals they had sent, often hoping, sometimes doubting, that anyone would hear them? When the doors opened, the warriors emerged, moving with a balance of authority and calm reassurance. Their presence was commanding yet non-threatening, their movements deliberate and confident. For the residents of the colony, it was a moment of disbelief. They had lived for years under the shadow of neglect, and yet here were people from Earth, stepping onto their world, bringing the promise of help and support. The initial reaction was a mixture of fear, skepticism, and cautious hope. After years of abandonment, it was difficult to believe that anyone had truly remembered them. Lyra approached cautiously, observing the newcomers. She was naturally suspicious, having learned over years that appearances could be deceiving. But as she watched, she began to notice the small gestures, the careful way the warriors treated the environment, the respect in their eyes for the people and the systems that had kept the colony alive. Slowly, the tension began to ease. Words were exchanged, introductions made, and the first steps of trust began to take root. The warriors quickly assessed the needs of the colony. Life support systems were prioritized, energy supplies checked, and medical resources evaluated. They worked efficiently, but always with an awareness of the emotional weight their presence carried. It was not enough to repair systems and deliver supplies, they needed to show that someone cared, that someone had remembered the people who had been left behind. Every action, every small gesture, carried meaning beyond its immediate function. As the days passed, the warriors moved among the residents, helping where they could and learning from the people who had survived in isolation for so long. They observed how Lyra and others had adapted to life on the outpost, mastering skills that were rare even on Earth. They saw the ingenuity required to make limited resources last, the creativity in finding solutions to problems that no one else had anticipated, and the quiet courage that allowed communities to endure without recognition or support. The admiration they felt was quiet but profound. The process of rebuilding trust was delicate. Many residents were cautious, wary of promises that might not be fulfilled or help that might disappear as quickly as it had arrived. The warriors understood this instinct. They did not make grand declarations, instead, they focused on tangible actions. Repairs were made, supplies distributed, and systems stabilized. Every completed task, no matter how small, became proof that Earth had indeed remembered them. Every smile, every moment of relief, reinforced the fragile but growing bond between the warriors and the people of the colony. There were challenges, of course. Systems had degraded over years of neglect, and some were on the verge of complete failure. Environmental hazards, from unpredictable storms to shifts in local gravity, tested the warriors' ingenuity and adaptability. They had to think on their feet, using both their training and their understanding of the colony's unique conditions to overcome obstacles quickly and efficiently. At times, the residents assisted, sharing knowledge that only experience in that environment could provide. It was a collaboration built on mutual respect, each side contributing what the other needed. Children, in particular, were both curious and cautious. Many had grown up knowing nothing but isolation, and the sudden appearance of strangers from Earth was at once exciting and frightening. The warriors approached them gently, sharing stories and engaging in simple tasks that built familiarity and trust. Slowly, laughter returned to the colony. Where there had been only quiet routines and careful survival, there was now the sound of curiosity, joy, and the tentative beginnings of hope. Families reunited with the warriors, sharing tales of hardships, triumphs, and endurance. Parents spoke of nights when resources were nearly gone, of storms that had damaged the outpost, and of the quiet determination that had kept everyone alive. Each story was a testament to human resilience, a reminder that even in the absence of help, people could find ways to survive and support one another. The warriors listened with respect and empathy, understanding that their role was not just to provide aid but to witness and honor the strength of those who had endured so long. The process of stabilizing the colony was gradual but steady. Engineers worked alongside the residents to repair and upgrade systems, medics treated minor injuries and chronic conditions, and communicators established stable links to Earth. The presence of the warriors allowed the colony to plan for the future, to take steps that had previously seemed impossible due to isolation and limited resources. Every improvement, every repaired system, brought relief and renewed confidence. Through it all, the warriors remained mindful of the colony's emotional state. They avoided overwhelming the residents, understanding that sudden change could be disorienting. Instead, they worked patiently, guiding and teaching, demonstrating skills that could be passed on for long-term sustainability. The message was clear: Earth had remembered, and now the residents were not alone in their struggle. Support was not temporary, it was a lasting connection that would continue beyond the immediate mission. As the first week passed, the colony began to feel a sense of stability it had not known in years. Energy systems functioned reliably, medical needs were addressed, and communication lines with Earth were restored. The residents, once hesitant and fearful, began to engage openly with the warriors. Children laughed freely, families shared meals, and a sense of community grew stronger. For the first time in a long while, the outpost felt alive, vibrant, and connected to the wider universe. The warriors, too, were affected. They had come expecting to face challenges and isolation, but what they encountered instead was a community of remarkable resilience, creativity, and courage. Each interaction reminded them why their mission mattered, not for glory, not for recognition, but for the simple, profound act of remembering and helping those who had been forgotten. They understood that the strength of humanity was measured not only in technology or strategy but in empathy, connection, and the willingness to act when others had abandoned hope. Outside the colony, the universe continued its indifferent rhythm. Stars twinkled at unimaginable distances, comets streaked silently across the void, and planets rotated slowly in their orbits. Yet within this small pocket of life, change was happening. The warrior's presence had transformed the colony, not through force, but through care, collaboration, and unwavering commitment. The galaxy may have forgotten these worlds, but Earth had remembered, and in doing so, had begun to write a new chapter for those who had endured so long in isolation. By the end of the first month, the colony was functioning more efficiently than it had in years. Systems were upgraded, resource management was optimized, and the residents had regained confidence in their ability to survive and thrive. More importantly, they had regained faith in humanity. The connection between the warriors and the residents had created a foundation for trust, collaboration, and hope that would extend far beyond the immediate mission. As the warriors prepared for the next phase of their journey to reach other forgotten colonies, the residents watched them with gratitude and respect. Lyra, once skeptical and cautious, now felt a quiet relief and admiration for those who had come to help. She understood that the warrior's presence was not just about fixing systems or delivering supplies, it was about showing that even in the vast, uncaring expanse of the universe, someone had remembered them, and someone had acted to make a difference. And so, the first mission was a success not only in technical terms but in human terms. The warriors had descended without warning, navigated challenges, and restored hope to a community that had almost given up. The forgotten had been remembered, and the galaxy had been reminded that human courage, compassion, and determination could defy distance, isolation, and despair. The story of this first colony was just the beginning. Beyond the horizon, other forgotten worlds awaited, each with its own struggles, each with its own people clinging to hope. The warriors, strengthened by their experience and the bonds they had formed, prepared to move on, ready to bring the same determination, care, and commitment to those who had been left behind. They had proven that Earth remembers. And as they set their sights on the next colony, one thing was certain: humanity's courage and compassion would not be forgotten, no matter how vast the distance. With the first colony stabilized and hope beginning to bloom, the warriors turned their attention to the next challenge. Beyond the horizon lay other outposts and settlements, each isolated in their own way, each surviving on the edge of possibility. The team had learned much from their first landing about the resilience of people, the fragile balance of long-neglected systems, and the importance of trust. These lessons would guide them as they moved deeper into forgotten territory, where every decision would carry immense weight. The journey between colonies was quiet yet tense. Space stretched endlessly, a dark ocean dotted with distant stars. Inside the spacecraft, the warriors reviewed their plans, ensuring every supply, tool, and piece of equipment was ready. They also considered the psychological challenges that lay ahead. Many of the colonies had been abandoned for decades, and fear, distrust, or even despair could greet them at any landing. The team prepared not just for mechanical or environmental challenges, but for the human ones, rebuilding hope and trust wherever it had faded. As the spacecraft approached the next colony, a more complex picture emerged. This settlement had been larger in its early days, built with ambitious plans that had faltered over time. Some structures were partially damaged, energy systems were unstable, and supplies were critically low. The colony's inhabitants had developed ingenious methods to survive despite these challenges, improvising repairs, rationing resources, and creating a fragile but functional community. The warriors understood that they were not just providing assistance, they were entering a delicate ecosystem that required respect, care, and precision. The landing was executed flawlessly, a testament to the warriors' skill and preparation. Dust rose in soft clouds as the spacecraft touched the surface, signaling the arrival of outsiders for the first time in years. Residents of the colony observed cautiously from a distance, their curiosity mingled with apprehension. Years of neglect had taught them to be wary, to question every promise, and to protect themselves from disappointment. The warriors, aware of this, approached slowly and deliberately, hands visible, gestures calm, communicating not only with words but with their presence that spoke of respect and intent. Initial interactions were cautious. Residents asked questions, sought explanations, and tested the intentions of the warriors. Every answer, every action, had to reinforce that the visitors were there to help, not to control. The team moved methodically, stabilizing failing systems, repairing energy networks, and delivering essential supplies. Yet beyond the practical work, they focused on the human aspect, listening to stories, understanding fears, and showing empathy. They recognized that technical repairs alone were not enough. Restoring confidence, pride, and hope required patience, understanding, and genuine care. Children once again played a central role in this delicate process. Their curiosity and openness contrasted with the adults' cautious approach, offering the warriors moments of connection that built trust naturally. Simple games, shared meals, and small acts of kindness created bonds that words alone could not. The laughter of children, so rare in these isolated worlds, became a symbol of renewal. Adults, observing these interactions, slowly allowed themselves to engage more openly, realizing that the arrival of the warriors was not a threat but a promise fulfilled. The restoration of infrastructure was a gradual but steady process. Engineers worked alongside local technicians and residents, teaching techniques that would allow the community to maintain improvements independently. Energy systems were repaired and upgraded, life support networks stabilized, and communication lines established. The warriors understood that long-term sustainability required collaboration. They were not there to take over, but to empower the residents with knowledge, tools, and confidence to continue thriving on their own. Medical teams addressed both immediate and chronic needs. Years of isolation had made access to proper health care challenging, and minor ailments often became more serious without timely treatment. The warriors brought with them expertise and resources that allowed for thorough assessments, treatments, and preventive measures. In doing so, they not only improved physical health but also reinforced the message that these communities mattered, that Earth had not forgotten them, and that their well-being was a priority. Throughout their time in the second colony, the warriors emphasized communication. They facilitated updates to Earth, allowing families and friends to reconnect across light years. These connections were more than logistical, they were emotional lifelines, bridging the gap created by years of neglect. Residents experienced the joy of knowing that someone, somewhere, had heard their voices and was actively working to ensure they were safe and supported. The sense of isolation began to fade, replaced by a growing confidence that humanity's reach extended even into the most distant corners of the galaxy. The warriors also took time to understand the cultural and social dynamics of each colony. Years of isolation had created unique traditions, practices, and problem-solving methods. Recognizing and respecting these differences was essential. They adapted their strategies to fit local needs, showing that aid and support were not about imposing change, but about enhancing the strengths and resilience already present within each community. This approach reinforced trust and cooperation, turning what could have been tense encounters into partnerships rooted in respect and shared purpose. Environmental challenges tested the team's adaptability. Some areas were prone to sudden storms or harsh temperature shifts, while others faced structural vulnerabilities that required immediate attention. The warriors' ability to respond quickly and effectively reinforced the confidence of the residents. Each successful repair, each stabilization of a failing system, was proof that Earth had remembered, and that someone was willing to act decisively to protect them. It was a message that carried far more weight than words alone could convey. As days turned into weeks, the second colony began to experience a transformation similar to the first. Energy flowed reliably, communication lines were secure, and basic supplies were plentiful. But more importantly, the emotional landscape shifted. Residents smiled more freely, children played openly, and the atmosphere of cautious fear gradually gave way to one of cautious optimism. The presence of the warriors reminded everyone that they were not alone, and that humanity could still fulfill its promise to the forgotten. The interaction between warriors and residents deepened over shared meals, joint problem-solving, and collaborative planning for the future. Adults shared techniques for resource management, children taught practical lessons in creativity and resilience, and the warriors imparted knowledge gained from years of experience on Earth. Each encounter built trust, each shared effort reinforced connection, and each successful repair strengthened the bond between the distant worlds and their home planet. The success of the second colony provided a blueprint for the next missions. Lessons learned about trust building, communication, and collaboration informed strategies for reaching even more isolated settlements. The team had discovered that the key to success was not simply technology or efficiency, but understanding, empathy, and patience. By focusing on people first, systems second, they were able to achieve outcomes that exceeded expectations. Beyond the immediate improvements, the warriors emphasized long-term sustainability. Residents were trained to maintain and repair systems, to manage resources efficiently, and to continue communication with Earth independently. These efforts ensured that progress would endure long after the warriors had departed. It was not enough to provide temporary relief, the goal was to empower these communities to thrive independently, while knowing they were not forgotten. By the end of the mission at the second colony, hope had been firmly restored. Residents now understood that Earth had not abandoned them, that someone had remembered, and that their struggles mattered. The warriors had succeeded in more than logistics and repairs, they had reignited faith in humanity, shown that courage and care could bridge unimaginable distances, and left behind a legacy that would endure for generations. As the team prepared to depart, there was a quiet celebration of human resilience. Families expressed gratitude, children waved goodbye, and adults shared stories of endurance and adaptation. The bond formed during this mission was deep and lasting, and the warriors carried it with them as they moved toward the next colony. They had seen firsthand the difference that care, empathy, and decisive action could make, and they were determined to extend that same hope to every forgotten corner of the galaxy. The universe beyond remained vast and indifferent, yet within each colony, a new energy was emerging. Systems were stable, communities were connected, and the spirit of human resilience had been strengthened. The forgotten were no longer forgotten, and the work of the warriors was proving that hope could be restored even in the most isolated places. Each colony they reached became a beacon, a reminder that no matter how far one might be from Earth, humanity's reach could extend across the stars. With preparations complete and supplies replenished, the warriors set their sights on the next colony. The challenges ahead were unknown, yet their confidence had grown. They had witnessed courage, creativity, and endurance that surpassed even their expectations. Every lesson learned, every success achieved, reinforced the importance of their mission. The galaxy may have forgotten these worlds, but Earth had remembered, and with each mission, the promise of connection and hope spread further. And so, the warriors moved on, leaving behind communities that were stronger, more resilient, and filled with renewed hope. The impact of their presence would endure, not only in the restored systems and resources, but in the hearts and minds of the people they had helped. Humanity had proven that even in the face of neglect, isolation, and hardship, courage, care, and determination could restore what had been lost, and remind the forgotten that they were never truly alone. The final phase of the mission had begun. Earth's warriors had traveled from one forgotten colony to another, restoring hope, repairing systems, and rebuilding connections that had been lost for decades. Each settlement had its own challenges, its own unique struggles, but the lessons learned from the previous colonies guided every decision. The team understood that the mission was no longer simply about survival, it was about restoring faith, dignity, and the belief that no human being, no matter how far from home, was ever truly forgotten. As the spacecraft approached the next colony, the team prepared meticulously. They reviewed environmental data, double-checked supplies, and went over contingency plans. The colony they were about to visit had been reported as the most isolated of all, with the fewest resources and the oldest infrastructure. The people there had survived against the odds, relying on ingenuity and sheer willpower. The warriors knew that the arrival of Earth support could transform their lives, offering stability and a renewed connection to the wider human community. When they landed, the scene before them was both fragile and remarkable. The outpost consisted of structures that had been patched and repatched over decades, each one telling a story of endurance. Residents had adapted to extreme conditions, turning every challenge into an opportunity for survival. Dust and sand shifted with the wind, harsh light from a distant star illuminated the landscape, and the quiet hum of generators filled the air. The colony was alive, but barely. It needed guidance, supplies, and the assurance that someone cared. The warriors stepped forward carefully, mindful of the residents' history of isolation and distrust. For years, people had learned to be wary of outsiders, to question motives, and to protect themselves from disappointment. The team moved with calm authority, introducing themselves and explaining their purpose. They did not make grand promises, instead, they focused on practical, visible actions, stabilizing energy systems, repairing life support units, and distributing essential supplies. Every gesture carried meaning beyond its immediate purpose. Each small success was a proof of Earth's attention, a demonstration that the forgotten were no longer invisible. The first interactions were tense but gradually eased as residents witnessed the sincerity and competence of the warriors. Leaders of the community shared their experiences, pointing out areas of immediate concern while recounting stories of survival. The warriors listened carefully, asking questions, taking notes, and observing the unique ways in which the colony had adapted. It was a delicate process. Every action needed to build trust, every word needed to reinforce that the help arriving was genuine and lasting. Children, as in the previous colonies, became bridges between the warriors and the residents. Their curiosity, openness, and natural energy created opportunities for connection. The warriors engaged with them in simple ways, helping with tasks, sharing small lessons, and listening to their stories. Laughter began to echo across the outpost, a sound that had been rare for years. Adults, seeing these interactions, began to relax and participate, realizing that these visitors were not here to control or judge, but to support and empower. As the days passed, repairs and improvements were completed with precision. Energy systems were stabilized, water supplies replenished, and communications equipment restored. The warriors trained local technicians to maintain these systems independently, ensuring that progress would endure long after the mission concluded. They provided not only tools and materials but knowledge, guidance, and confidence, empowering residents to continue thriving in isolation while remaining connected to Earth. Medical teams worked alongside local caregivers, addressing both immediate and long-term health concerns. Chronic conditions that had been exacerbated by years of neglect were treated, and preventive measures were implemented. This care was as much about reassurance as it was about treatment. The residents began to understand that their well-being mattered, that Earth had not forgotten them, and that someone was actively working to ensure their safety and stability. Throughout their time on the colony, the warriors emphasized collaboration. They encouraged residents to share their expertise, particularly in problem-solving and adaptation. The knowledge and ingenuity developed over decades of isolation were respected and integrated into the restoration process. This partnership created a sense of ownership and pride, reinforcing that the recovery was a shared effort, not simply the work of outsiders. Emotional connections deepened over meals, conversations, and shared tasks. Residents told stories of past hardships, of moments when survival seemed impossible, and of the ingenuity that had kept them alive. The warriors listened intently, acknowledging every struggle, every triumph, and every act of perseverance. In return, they shared insights from Earth, explaining the broader world, the advances in technology, and the renewed commitment to supporting these communities. This exchange fostered mutual respect and understanding, laying the groundwork for lasting bonds. By the second week of the mission, the final colony had transformed in both function and spirit. Systems operated reliably, children played freely, and adults engaged with the warriors openly and with gratitude. Trust had been rebuilt, not through words alone, but through consistent action, empathy, and a recognition of the residents' own strengths. Hope, once fragile and uncertain, had been restored firmly, and the outpost now reflected not only survival but potential. The warriors took time to prepare residents for the future. They shared plans for continued communication with Earth, training on maintenance procedures, and strategies for sustainable growth. The goal was to ensure that each colony could maintain independence while remaining part of a larger, supportive network. By empowering the residents, the warriors reinforced the idea that help was not temporary and that Earth's remembrance was enduring. The final interactions were filled with emotion. Residents expressed gratitude in ways both small and profound, from gestures of friendship to heartfelt stories of how the warriors' arrival had changed lives. Children presented drawings and simple tokens of appreciation, adults offered carefully chosen gifts or symbolic acts of respect. Each interaction carried meaning far beyond its physical form, representing the connection that had been rebuilt between isolated colonies and their home planet. As the spacecraft prepared to depart, the warriors reflected on the mission as a whole. They had faced unknown conditions, navigated isolation, and rebuilt trust across multiple colonies. They had witnessed courage, creativity, and resilience in communities that had endured years of neglect. More importantly, they had proven that humanity's commitment to its own could extend across unimaginable distances. The mission had been more than logistics and repairs, it had been an affirmation of care, responsibility, and moral clarity. From orbit, the warriors observed the colonies one last time. The energy systems glowed steadily, communication arrays transmitted reliably, and small signs of life and activity flourished across the settlements. The outposts, once fragile and isolated, now radiated strength, connection, and hope. It was a visible reminder that even in the most distant corners of the galaxy, humanity's reach could restore life, dignity, and purpose. The story of these forgotten colonies spread slowly back to Earth, through secure communications and controlled reports. Citizens of Earth learned that distant worlds had survived, that lives had endured against the odds, and that courage, empathy, and decisive action could make a difference even in the farthest reaches of space. Communities on Earth celebrated the success quietly, with the knowledge that their planet had kept a promise to those who needed it most. For the warriors, the mission concluded not with fanfare, but with a quiet sense of fulfillment. They had acted decisively, ethically, and compassionately, bridging isolation with connection, despair with hope, and neglect with remembrance. They had reminded humanity and the galaxy that while distance can separate people, it cannot diminish the value of human life or the importance of compassion. As they traveled home, the warriors carried with them more than memories, they carried proof that courage, collaboration, and care could overcome even the most extreme challenges. The colonies, now stable and confident, would continue to grow, thrive, and remain connected to Earth. They had been forgotten by the galaxy, but remembered by their fellow humans, and that remembrance had changed everything. The legacy of the mission extended beyond the immediate colonies. Plans were made for ongoing support, the sharing of knowledge, and the establishment of a system to ensure that no colony would ever be left isolated again. Earth's commitment had been demonstrated, and the message was clear: humanity would act, even when the universe seemed indifferent, to protect and support its own. In the quiet vastness of space, the final lesson of the mission became evident: courage, empathy, and moral clarity can bridge distances that seem insurmountable. The forgotten had been remembered. The warriors had acted without hesitation. and humanity had proven that it could extend not only technology and resources, but care, hope, and connection, across the stars. Returning to Earth, the warriors were welcomed not with ceremony, but with respect and quiet acknowledgement. They had fulfilled a mission that few could have imagined, touched lives that had been isolated for decades, and restored hope where it had nearly disappeared. Their actions reminded everyone that the measure of a civilization is not only in its achievements or technologies, but in its willingness to remember, protect, and act for those who cannot act for themselves. And so, the story concluded with a simple truth: the galaxy may forget, but humanity remembers. The warriors' mission had ensured that the forgotten were no longer alone, that hope had been restored, and that Earth's commitment to its people, near or far, was unyielding. The colonies thrived, the residents rejoiced, and the legacy of care, courage, and connection endured, proving that even in the most distant reaches of space, humanity's compassion could reach, restore, and inspire.